Here's Brody Brazil.
I'll tell you what we don't have on the San Francisco 49ers yet, and that's any idea of how this season is going to go or ultimately end, whether it's the Super Bowl in New Orleans or not. You're crazy to think already that you might understand how it's going to shake out. But what I think we do have through 2 games and weeks and efforts are some very first impressions of this season, right? Because 1 game is not enough, but 2 games, 1 at home and 1 on the road, not ultimate impressions, but very first impressions of this team and their starting point for this season. Like, where does it go from here? I think we can establish that. Now, the differences are between week 1 and week 2, a victory and then a loss, a Monday night home game, and then an earlier Sunday morning game, West Coast time, as the 49ers lost yesterday to the Minnesota Vikings. But the commonality is this. In both weeks and games so far, it feels like the 49ers left something on the table. And even in the game against the Jets where they won 32-19, they only trailed briefly 7-3, and then they scored again, came back, and never looked back. Yeah, they looked sharp and crisp in that game, and they owned the time of possession basically like 2-1. The ratio, and Aaron Rodgers hardly ever got out there on the field, it felt like, in that game. 49ers scored on 8 straight possessions in that Jets game. But they did settle for 6 field goals. Aiyuk dropped 1 in the end zone. So there was a lot more it felt like the 49ers could have done on the scoreboard. But hey, 32-19 season opener on Monday Night Football, you definitely take that. Compare it, though, to the Vikings game, and yesterday in Minnesota just felt so uphill. The entire 60 minutes, the 49ers never led. There were costly miscues on offense and defense and special teams, and obviously you get a punt blocked. You have a punt return that you drop. Fortunately, it was recovered. You allow a 97-yard catch and touchdown run for the Vikings, and even the fumble that Brock Purdy had, kind of an indecisive play. You just don't expect that from the 49ers. And all that considered, right? Like, they didn't even have to be perfect, the 49ers, in yesterday's game. They just had to be better in some areas, and they still only lose by 6 points. So that's kind of an interesting takeaway. A weird game, and they still get 400 yards total, but they just can't win the game because they do a little bit wrong in every area, just enough wrong to have it be kind of an ugly, bad-feeling game. So let's kind of break down player by player and some of these first impressions, and it's weird we start with, well, Christian McCaffrey, because he hasn't played either of the games. And after missing week 1 when he was ruled out, you think maybe, all right, it's the season opener, setback in training camp, it's more precautionary than reactionary. But what we find out before preparing in the week 2, for the week 2 game, we realize that this is bad. It's actually gotten worse. It's regressed to the point where Kyle Shanahan said that Christian McCaffrey had one of his worst days in practice this past week. And now he's going to miss 4 games. The earliest he can come back is October 10th against Seattle. And I think now you're at the point where you've realized this is serious, this is severe enough for him to miss this time, and this is going to be a storyline because every game the 49ers play, unless they're really good and dominant and win the game, this question and topic is going to come up. What if they had McCaffrey? Would it be any different? But the real thing is this. The 49ers have bigger ambitions. They'll suffice without him. I'm not going to say they'll be as good as they could be without him, but they'll get through this, but they need to make sure he gets right. This Achilles tendonitis for a running back is a big deal. You have no choice, but at this point now, because you're going to miss so much time with him, you only have one choice, and that's to make sure that you take your time and get this right and don't feel rushed, even though that's just human nature. I think in the first 2 weeks, it's obvious that the 49ers missed Christian McCaffrey. Would he have been a game changer against the Minnesota Vikings? Maybe. In a 6-point game, maybe. But I don't even know that he would have fixed the results, losing by 6, and kind of how sloppy the 49ers were all the way around yesterday. Jordan Mason, in the absence of McCaffrey, has been fantastic. I mean, if there is one bright spot in all of this, Jordan Mason is making the most of McCaffrey's vacancy at the running back position. He's already had more attempts than 2022 and 2023. Not combined, but separately. 28 carries in week 1, 20 carries yesterday. That's 48. Again, that 48 total is more than he had all of 22 and all of 2023. In week 1 against the Jets, 147 yards. His longest was for 24. He got a touchdown. Same thing yesterday, a touchdown, another 100-yard game on 20 carries. His longest run was 22 yards. He just looks big. He looks poised. He looks fast. He finds the hole. He goes for it. He breaks tackles. Like, I really do think in the headlines of the season through 2 games, Jordan Mason, definitely one of the best 49ers players thus far. And it's something that would not have happened if the Christian McCaffrey injury didn't happen. Brock Purdy, week 1, looked entirely composed and sharp and crisp, and all of his passes were spot on. I feel like there was a sequence, maybe it was even a single drive, where he underthrew somebody, then overthrew somebody, and then kind of had an indecisive play. But with the exception of that, he was so good on Monday Night Football. You're thinking, wow, this is a guy that right after Dak Prescott signed his contract, all right, this is a guy that this is looking right now like he might be the next $60 million quarterback. And I'm not here to say that Brock Purdy was bad yesterday. 28 for 36, 319 yards against Minnesota, but a touchdown, an interception, a fumble, definitely kind of falls in line with everything else the 49ers were doing. It just wasn't good enough. Wasn't terrible, definitely wasn't great, but also wasn't good enough. And there's also this history with Brock Purdy, which I find like mind-blowing. He's now 16-2 against NFC opponents. The only 2 losses came against the same Minnesota Vikings team. Last year in October, yesterday, obviously, here in September of 2024, both on the road against the Vikings. So playing on the road against Minnesota, just kind of an unlucky thing. And I know you already know about the 49ers' history. They haven't won a game on the road in Minnesota in more than 30 years now. It also felt like Brock Purdy in the pocket had a lot more time in week 1 against the Jets than he did yesterday against the Minnesota Vikings. So that's just kind of an early impression. Fred Warner on defense, man, he has done something impactful every single game. And as much as everybody on the outside might look at the team and say, well, the best defensive player is Nick Bosa, or the most critical player and defender is Bosa, I'm here to say that, wow, how could it not be Fred Warner after these first 2 games? Week 1, I think it was the Jets' maybe first possession or first drive. He forces a fumble against the Jets. And then yesterday, 9 tackles, a sack, an interception, and 2 forced fumbles. One of them, by the way, would have been an easy touchdown right at the goal line. He punches the football out. He is so good at punching footballs out on the tackle, disrupting. And so Fred Warner has easily been in that same conversation. If we're going to say that Jordan Mason is one of the headline players so far offensively, Fred Warner is definitely that on defense for the 49ers. Brandon Aiyuk, week 1, 5 targets. He obviously dropped that pass, which he called a dime from Brock Purdy in the end zone. Again, week 1, missed most of training camp with his teammates. What do you chalk it up to? Or did he just drop the ball? Okay, but week 2, also only 5 targets, 4 catches, 43 yards. Just a small sample size, like too small of a sample size. I think he could have been a huge factor in week 1 had he at least brought in that pass in the end zone, scored a touchdown in week 1, but in yesterday's game just wasn't really influential at all. I'm not here to take anything back. He just didn't really make his mark on the game. In fact, it felt like in the third quarter and beyond, you almost had to remind yourself like Brandon Aiyuk is in this game on this team. And so part of it is just getting to him more targets, more attempts, getting the football to Brandon Aiyuk a little bit more. And so I'm sure that's something they'll go over, but it does not look like the connection he had with Brock Purdy last year. I can't wait for him to just get on with being BA. You had the contract situation. You were late through training camp. You missed all of that. Now I hope it's not that Blake Snell effect, right? Where Blake Snell was a free agent, signed late with the Giants, missed all the spring training, and then the first couple weeks and months of the season were really bad. He was playing catch-up, and then he admits it. And Brandon Aiyuk obviously has been there, done that with his team before, so it's not like he's brand new to being on this team and what exactly is expected. But when you miss the repetition of training camp, it just always makes me wonder, like, practice is important. Training camp, to some degree, is important for everybody to go through that together. So I hope for him he could go forward and move on and be himself. And yeah, the contract is the contract, and now you're a much better paid player, and the expectations only go up. Kind of like what Deebo Samuel had also recently gone through. So I want to point this out about Deebo. In the absence of Christian McCaffrey, it was suggested that the 49ers could use him more as a running back. Week 2 for him rushing the football, 2 carries, -10 yards. It seems like as soon as Deebo gets the football, if he's not catching it, if he's rushing it, they are all over him. Now receiving, 10 targets, 8 catches, 110 yards, his longest for 28. No problems there. I'm just here to point out rushing versus receiving. It's kind of 2 totally different stories. Small sample size here, but I think we know what you want Deebo Samuel doing. And the catches he made against Minnesota, one right across the middle of the field, one on the end zone, the sidelines, which I'm still not sure if he had his toe up and heel up and toe down. I think he was out of bounds there, but whatever, we'll take it. He has the ability. He continues to impress with amazing catches in tough situations, in traffic and tension situations. He has the ability to do that. I would love to see him downfield a little bit farther and making those catches, but I also understand that that's not necessarily the 49ers scheme, and that's not necessarily the game plan for Deebo Samuel. That's not on him, but I'd love to see more of that. So overall, 2 games, a 1-1 record. Let's remember, at one point last year, the 49ers got to the Super Bowl and even lost only in overtime to Kansas City. But at one point last year in the regular season, end of October, start of November, I think, right? They lost 3 in a row. We're not at that point yet. You can still lose 3 in a row and get to the Super Bowl. They lost yesterday, and it was a rough one. And they're a little bit shorthanded. And maybe they're a little bit cursed in Minnesota. Like I said, 30 years without a road win in Minnesota. Now, some of that shouldn't matter, right? Different teams, players, coaches, everything. But it's a weird history to have. It was also a shorter week from a Monday night game week 1 to a Sunday morning game week 2. The early body clock, right? The 10 a.m. start, basically 10:05 a.m. Pacific time start in Minnesota for the body clock. 49ers also went 1 for 6 on 3rd downs in week 2. They had the punt blocked. Just a lot of small things that don't add up and win you a football game. But the last point I want to make here is first impression-wise, history always seems easier. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean in reverse. As you remember the 49ers going to the Super Bowl last year and how the season all came together, let's not forget their 2 playoff games to get to the Super Bowl, they only won each of those by 3 points. A lot of things had to go right through the regular season, in the postseason, even to get to the Super Bowl. It's always easier in reverse. That's my point. And so this season is not supposed to be easy. It's not going to be easy. There's going to be weeks like this. You just hope there's not many of them. And you also hope that the 49ers showed you even enough in this game to show you that it was a winnable game. That was still on the table. They weren't blown out. They were never far out of this game, far out of control. They made it a manageable loss. Now, granted, you want a different result, but even when they do so many things wrong, they're still only 6 points away from losing to a very, very respectable team. And so that's the case after 2 weeks. So those are my first impressions. Let me know what your first impressions are in the comment section down below. You made it here to the end of this video. I really appreciate that. Thumbs up for me down below. That'll greatly help me, this video, and this channel. And also don't forget, take some time right now. Go down there and make sure you've already hit that subscribe button. That way I definitely get to see you back here next time.